want to start with a short attunement. So as you sit here, there is right now a physical, emotional, mental, usually in the good way they are one, experience of this moment. And I want to direct your or our attention for a moment to the wholeness of physical, emotional, mental experience as I sit or stand here. And if it's possible, to remember throughout the session how does it feel when you look through your whole body? Usually we look here and we listen here, and the issue with that is that because we live in a world that is fairly disembodied, we are not really aware, I believe, how much information we miss. And so one aspect of the collective traumatization, of course, our individual traumatization, our attachment issues, all of it, but there is a much bigger field that I think needs to be explored more. And there is our natural state, I believe, is that my body knows a lot about your body. My emotions know a lot about your emotions, and my mind knows a lot about your mind. But in fact, when I ask you, how do you feel? And I don't know how you feel, that's already the pathology. We are used to ask each other, oh, how do you feel? But why don't I know how you feel? That's what I meant before in the plenum. I said, we are used to a fragmented world, and the unified world is an exception. And that's the upside down hanging man. The reality is unified, and suffering is the exception. But that's not our state. And I believe that's not our state because we have been born into, for example, in Germany, we are walking with a blanket, and we don't know, because forever we are walking with that blanket, like in our lifetime, and we don't know how life feels without a blanket. Nobody that has been born after the Second World War in Germany, knows how it feels without it. Nobody that has been born here in the US into the dynamics of racism and slavery knows how it feels without it. All the pain, all the hurt, all the killing, all the whatever is part of us looking. Does this make sense? But that's crucial, because when the pain is here, I cannot see it here. When the pain is wired in me, it's a filter. Trauma creates a filter. When I'm traumatized, where I'm traumatized, I can't see you. I see you in a reduced form. Let's say if I have any trauma, violent trauma or like sexual trauma, if I look at another person, I can't see them fully in their sexuality. Cannot be. Because my traumatization in my nervous system reduces my experience. But that's crucial. This means when I look, and I know what I see usually when I look, I assume that that's what is out there. And so when we do we have different levels of work that we do. Of course, everything is under the premises of spiritual awakening. But a lot of spiritual awakening work kind of is endangered to bypass life. And that's something that we need to stop. And I think more and more modalities and teachers or movements or paths understand that it's not about getting somewhere, it's about getting here, because here is what we are looking for. And this sounds so simple, but it's actually very complex. And so when I look at you, so in our integration or healing, whatever work that we do in our groups, we learn a very precise use of our nervous system. So that means when, let's say, somebody experienced a trauma at age 4. So when the person comes to me and tells me about issues in whatever, relationship issues, work issues, so people usually come with symptoms, as we all know, and our job is to not be blinded by the smoke, but to find a fire. And how we find a fire is trauma is a kind of a hyper-regulated area, and usually the healing is in a co-regulation and then a healthy regulation. So what we do a lot is that we learn how to use our nervous system as a time travel machine, I often call it, because we can travel into each other's developmental processes and pick the gems that are still waiting there to develop for us to be at least a mature human being. And so when I talk to you and I'm not looking through my whole body, I miss a lot of information. Because you, and I know here are many experienced people, but when somebody speaks about an issue, the physical, emotional, and mental experience is not unified. Cannot be, otherwise it wouldn't be an issue. So if something is unclear, I cannot look into myself where I have a difficulty. Does it make sense? I cannot see myself clearly, that's why I go to a therapist. So when I cannot see myself clearly, usually it has an element in my physical, emotional, and mental representation. There's something that appears on all levels, usually. So when we speak to each other, we usually, or often, get hypnotized by the mental content. So we listen, what are you telling me? But I'm much more interested in what you're not telling me. Not what you're telling me. What you're telling me, you anyway know somehow. But my job is to find out what you're not telling me. And that's what happens in you while you speak. That's why when we pay attention for this hour and say, okay, what happens if I use, like as if my body had eyes all over. And I stand here and I look at you with my whole nervous system. Why? Because all of it is my antenna. Not just when I look out here. All of it. I see a lot with my legs. With my legs, I see what happens in your legs. And with my heart, I feel what happens in your heart. And with my eyes, I see what happens in your eyes. And so when we, and maybe for some of us, that's what we do every day when we work with clients anyway. But it's something that I believe is crucial because the collective dimension of trauma, that which I cannot recognize because I know the world only like that. And we need, as I often say, imagine your whole life, you grew up in this room. And I ask you something about the house. All your life, you grew up in this room, and I ask you something about the house. That's our challenge. So because I'm writing right now a book about the last 15 years of my work on this kind of collective issues, and I thought, wow, there is a territory that is not really well researched yet. There is a jungle out there, and all we have is what we all practiced until now. But I believe nobody ever went really as a collective into that jungle. And the nature with trauma is that there is no standalone trauma, really. The attachment trauma that I experience is because my parents were traumatized, and they were traumatized because their parents were traumatized, and they got traumatized in the war even more. And so, where is the beginning? And the beginning is with the Word. And the Word says, let there be light. So in creation itself, there is not two-ness. The Word and creation is the same, blue on blue. Like the blue word on the same blue background. That's non-duality, when our word is congruent with our consciousness state. Many people might talk about all kinds of states, but they are only real when the word transmits their state. And otherwise, it's not true. However much I read in books, it's not true. That's important. Many people talk about causal states and non-dual states, but it's only true when the state is present. It's not true when it was in the past or when I read it somewhere. Then better not to talk about it. We can talk about it as an exploration, but not as a truth, because it's not true. It's true when the word and the energy is the same. Does this make sense? Why is that so important? Because otherwise spirituality becomes a very kind of ridiculous place. Because we can read a lot about it, but it's only true when it's congruent. And it's the same with my physical, emotional, and mental experience as a human being. I often say our highest possibility is within our deepest humanity. That there is no up there. There is up there. I can, like Aurobindo talks about many higher states of mind and consciousness, and we can explore that. That's perfect. But for us, we are not living in a cave somewhere in the Himalayan mountains. We are living in culture, so we get every day triggered in many, many places in our energy field through the cultural process. And we imported a lot of traditions from the Far East, but some of them haven't been designed to be a cultural practice. They have been designed to be a monastic practice, or sit somewhere in the Himalaya, in a cave, in the Himalayas and practice. But that's not what we are doing. That's why for the West, or not even for the West, for everybody who practices in culture, I believe we need to develop state awareness and process awareness. It's absolutely key that moment to moment to moment, I'm aware of the process wherever I am. It's not enough if I rest in silence. There's silence and there is a process unfolding. And that's what I meant before in the big auditorium, that it's easy to be kind of relaxed and open and spacious when we are here. But it's not so easy when you stand in a war zone. It's not so easy when there are missiles coming. It's not so easy when you read about people cutting off other people's heads. And then either I say, okay, that's too toxic for me, and I run away. And maybe for some people that's good that they do it because they're so traumatized that it will trigger them all the time, and that we need a healing phase. But that's not the end of it. I cannot look away and want to be positive and then ignore all the pain that I see. I can be positive when I don't see it. But that's not universal consciousness without the pain. Universal consciousness is with the pain. And that's interesting. So there might be a phase in my life, for practice reasons, to not read the news and not be there. But I believe for our responsibility as practitioners, that's not enough. And I think it's an illusion. And we need to do something about this illusion. And that's why in my understanding of kind of energetic processes, we do a lot of work with seeing how energy flows through us as a human being, as a culture, as institutions, whatever, the universe. And so when we incarnate, is that the energy of our soul is subtle information. What is energy? Energy is information in movement. So this means that the whole universe is moving. The whole universe is a movement unfolding, and we are part of it. So we create patterns within this universe to dissolve patterns and create new ones. That's kind of a healthy developmental or evolutionary process. I'm not afraid to create structures. I can create a startup, bring funding, create what I want. But when I feel it's time to leave it and do something new, I will do it because I follow my calling. And my original contract with God is to follow that calling. And so when I create structures and I'm able to change them as my life changes and life changes in general. That's a fluid development. But I believe when in Germany they made an assessment, because we work also with some business consultants and I supervise some groups of consultants. And then they made an assessment of change processes in organizations. And they found out that 75 or something or more % of all change processes in organizations actually didn't change really something. Even if the people said, I liked it, I liked those workshops, I liked what we did, but significantly it didn't change the organization. And so that's why I think 3 elements are important. Evolution, that's the part of me that voluntarily wants to grow. In every one of us, spirit wants to move. So there is evolution, this is the part of me that wants anyway to grow, that is eager to grow, that is eager to develop. I think that's what brings us here together. And then there is another one that's habit. We all created habits in our life. Most probably your wife or your husband is the first habit that you find. That yeah, but the relation, once we say, oh, I know you, I'm already falling asleep, not literally, but energetic. I'm falling asleep with you when I say I know you, because I stop being really present. When I'm really present, I never know you. Everything that I know about you is an image that is already stored in my memory. That's not knowing. Knowing is only what happens right now. Relation is only what's happening right now. So when I say I know you, maybe I don't look anymore really at the person. Now when you're sitting here, you look at me because maybe you don't know me or it's new and I don't know you. But then there is a phenomenon in life that maybe you explored that already. That's a stranger. What is a stranger? When there's a person that I don't know, let's say I see you for the first time, and I call you a stranger. I mean, in spiritual circles we don't do that, but but literally, when I look at you and I find out who you are, maybe I'm a bit more distant. I check you out, and if I like you, maybe I come a bit closer. What is actually the process to get to know each other? What is the why does it take? What takes time to feel close? And we accept that strangers are out there. They are the people that we see, whereas the real stranger is in me. I make you a stranger, and maybe you make me a stranger. But there's some kind of process, I think that's interesting, that we often need to feel close or to let other people come closer and trust them. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon, because I think that's a collective trauma symptom. That's not our original state. That's a symptom of something. And we tend to project it outside, that the stranger is the person, whereas the stranger happens in my experience. That's something that I need, nothing to do with you. And so I would love to explore now, when we look with our whole body, and we see that our whole body is a kind of an information, like an antenna. I can receive you, and I believe also that everybody here in the room transmits happily all the information of his or her life into this room. So all your development sits here, and not just in you, but you radiate it like a radio station. And so our nervous systems are in themselves, or they are per se amazing tools. They are super intelligent. And for example, once we are traumatized, the trauma is a very intelligent process, because it helps the organism to survive situations or stay in situations without falling apart. So trauma is a very intelligent function. But on the other hand, if we don't treat it, it's a kind of a block in the data flow. And the data flow is here, up and down, but the data flow goes through generations. And in the mystical practice, we say, when we transfer karma from one generation to the next, we are being born into a casting, into a coded information that creates an imprint. Already after conception, we come already with an imprint. And that imprint becomes manifest here. And so when there's a transgenerational data flow, and when we live an ethical life, or we call it in our work kind of the divine law, that I believe our nervous system knows the divine law. The divine law, for example, means that parents have to protect their children, and children have to honor their parents. There's a hierarchy, there's a kind of a God-given hierarchy that my parents will always stay my parents. But that's important because that's a transgenerational flow of light. But often that doesn't happen, as we see, and as we worked on already. And so life gets hurt. And I want to explore with you kind of one phenomenon, because we don't have so much time. We will do one exercise and then have a bit of a conversation about it. What I said before during the talk, I said when the moon has a reflection on the surface of the lake, and the water is very still, they look almost alike. And I believe relational competence, relation is that you arise in me the way you are there. Does this make sense? When you arise in me the way you are there. Because as we sit here, Thomas, as I said, is there's a small Thomas in you. And there's a small me, a you in me. Does this make sense? My energy has already, in my perception, you exist in my perception. Which means I'm a particle, or hopefully, I'm here, but I exist as a wave also. I exist as energy in everybody that knows me. I'm energy. In you, I'm energy. Here, I'm standing. So these are not two. But in our experience, they are often two. Does this make sense? That intimacy and not two-ness is the same. Our deepest intimacy is with God. But our deepest intimacy is not separate from our human intimacy. That's the same thing. So embodied non-duality means not only that there's a vertical sameness, there's an inside-outside. So when we get absorbed back into the source, inside and outside kind of disappear. That's what is non-duality, is when we are absorbed back in the spiritual practice, when we are absorbed back into the source. That's what it means, not two-ness. But the not two-ness is a full embodiment. And that's what many saints also practice, even after the enlightenment, to embody the new state of consciousness. And so when we, for example, witness our cultural process, as I said before, because we are all very informed, that what we experience, I believe what we read on the news, we often cannot really experience, I believe. I believe some of the news we can only experience when we are dissociated. And we are not able to really allow an intimacy in those moments. And I'm interested how you deal with that fact. Dissociation is something that is, I think, a very common friend in our daily process. And dissociation is a very important friend because it helped us in our development. And but I'm interested how you deal with this fact. How, when you read news, when you hear about what happens in your backyard, or doesn't mean that it's on the other side of the planet. Like, how do you deal with the fact that you're a global citizen through the technology in your lifetime. And how do you digest what you read? How do you digest what, I don't know, even if you see it while you're waiting for the bus or the plane, how do you relate to the fact that most probably you are overwhelmed quite often by the information that you read or that comes to you somehow? And I think that's an important, especially for us, because I believe in order to go into the jungle of the collective traumatization that was there before us, we need people that are equipped, people that did already some inner work, people that have some sort of transpersonal groundedness, that we are grounded in something bigger than our personality. Because once we engage in strong collective unconscious forces, that's a strong energy. There's a lot of energy in the collective unconscious that affects us a lot without knowing it. And after I saw those multiple of those collective trauma processes, when such a collective wave comes into the room, so when people are grounded and related enough and safe enough to allow the collective down-regulation to appear, because what happens in a war, during a war, many people get traumatized, and it's not that one person in this room is traumatized and all the others are stable. Many people are unstable in massive catastrophes. So my trauma is inherently connected to the trauma around me, because this resource drops away. And I think that's an important thing to consider, that some of our traumatization has much less resource to stabilize itself again. And I believe because we have been born into that, in a war situation, there's a collective regulation, a social trauma regulation function that happens. And that collective, what is trauma? Trauma is a frozen experience in time. Trauma is information frozen in time, somewhere encoded in our nervous system. And it's hurt relation. The relational capacity to myself and to the world is hurt. That means the healing, one of the major healings of trauma is relation. And not only relation, precise relation. Precise relation is one of the best healing methods that we have. And so what I experienced, for example, in Germany or Israel or other places, is that when the culture suppressed a lot of information, 6 million or millions of people in concentration camps do not experience what they experience. That, and in the Zen, you see, if energy is born, it needs to fulfill its movement. Once energy is like a soccer ball, if you kick it, the soccer ball will fly around until it discharges its energy. Our lifetime is the same, because our soul is a movement. When it's born, it's gonna have to fulfill its movement. And all the energy is frozen, doesn't disappear, even not when we die. It's still frozen energy, locked. And so when we work on this, in the moment enough people create a coherent field through presence, relation, groundedness, and trust, the collective nervous system starts to release information. But that's an amazing process. So collective information starts to come back into the experience of people in a room. And when it comes back, it has a very strong effect. And once I saw this a few times, I said, wow, now I understand why so many people fill our hospitals. Because if that tension is all the time in our nervous systems, without me knowing that it is, I see it only when that process happens. Usually the flashlight of my consciousness is with my work and with my closer relation. I don't look into that large room. And then I thought, wow, that's a revolution for our understanding of health. And that we have a little bit of time to look at our experience. I'm somehow interested, maybe we can have just a short exchange with two people beside you. How do you deal? And I'm not saying we have to experience it because that's ridiculous. We can't. But what's with the intimacy of inside and outside? That I am more aware how often I actually am dissociated when I relate to the cultural process. So when you get information about your neighborhood, your president, your atrocities that happen in your culture, how do you deal with this? What's your mechanism to be in that field of information? So my question, yes, because I think we are really living in a new challenge, or in a challenge. No, it's not new, but in a challenge that is very, very evident and creates a lot of pressure. Because if I'm traumatized, I'm constantly reminded of it through my outside. And if I do already inner work and I heal myself, I might still be affected strongly. So how do you deal with that fact as a more and more global citizen? So maybe you can turn just to the person next to you, and then we can discuss this afterwards. And maybe have two people connect. So how did it go with your listening with your whole body? How did you listen with your whole body while you listen to the person? Did this work? And more than that, because in the mystical work we are saying there are three different types of books. There's one book that describes the face of the time today. There are few books that people read 2,000 years ago, maybe 5,000 years ago, and they still read it. Why? Why didn't we get bored? Why are we reading certain books? They're around for a very long time. Why? Because they don't describe the face of the time. They describe what creates the face of the time. But for what I call mystical the professionals in the traditions, or the people that really know what they talk about. And so the real book is this. The real book is the continuous contemplation of the process of life. Which means, did you have your most wakeful conversation right now? And it means that when I listen to you and I make my relational capacity my meditation, it's kind of a social contemplation, then every interaction is a possibility to learn. As mystics in life, because we're not sitting in a cave, we need meditation flight hours. Because if the monk sits 10 hours a day and I sit 1 hour in the morning, there's a kind of an imbalance. So relation is my meditation, because I'm continuously relating to people every day. Why not to make that my meditation? I have silence meditation. I go to meditation retreats. But that's not enough. But what happens is meditation is an increase of resolution. So suddenly in myself and in others, I see and learn from life directly. That's why we call life is the book. This is the one book. All the other books are copies of the one book. That means that my continuous awareness, 24/7 a day, is my social contemplation. With my wife, with my children, with my colleagues at work, friends, and with the people that suffer. The people that I read about on the news. These are also part of my family. It's just a more extended family. And I believe blessed people like us that have enough resources. We have our personal issues, but we are not living somewhere where they bomb our houses right now, or whatever. Then I believe there is There is the pain in the world that is screaming. And then there is the pain in the world that is mute. And I believe the pain in the world that has no voice. Voice is creation. When we work with people and we listen to how they speak, they say a lot about how they create their life. So about how the word that you say has a creative capacity in your life. And through the word, we see a lot why stuff doesn't function or functions. But there is a layer of pain in the world that is muted. When people are really hurt, they don't scream. And I think that level of pain needs us. That it needs the people that have enough resources to care enough about the bigger radius of life. Not because we learned it and that's our kind of conditioned helper syndrome, but because we transcended our helper syndrome. It's not that through helping I gain your love, and if you don't love me back, I say everything that I did for you. That's not love. That's an economy. And then, but the real love is that I care, that I know that if I have enough resources, my ability to respond grows, and that means my radius of care grows. And it doesn't mean that we are talking about the other side of the planet. It's that I listen more. Where is the pain of the world that doesn't scream? That is so hurt that it has no voice, and that's why it cannot say help. And there's enough out there. And I believe the reason why I talk about this is because I believe this reduces evolution. Because habits I can change. Habits I can change through practice, discipline, tools. But trauma, I cannot change through the same process. Trauma needs another level of care, another level of safety, of relation, of healing. And when we look at also what Charles said afterwards, I believe because of the collective trauma, we feel that often, maybe not here in the room, but many people think we are on the planet. But my body is carbon and water, oxygen, all kinds of elements. My body is animated planet. So is yours. What I said before, the millions of years of life sit in our bodies. Millions of years. Life gave us a responsibility. Life said, I give you my most precious jewel. Everything that I learned so far, I hand you over. Take care of it. That's our contract with God. Because the life, the chi, the electricity that runs through our nervous systems animates everything that we learned so far and animates everything how we hurt each other. And I think without looking at the level of pain that is in the world, we won't restore our ability to follow the natural law, follow the ethics of life. And so I believe that's why I think that especially people who have more transpersonal awareness have already a certain state of maturity as human beings in the world. I think we are the ones that are called to care for a bigger radius and especially find the pain that is invisible because it doesn't scream. And this, I believe, reduces our innovation capacity. And this reduces our capacity to take care of certain global things like climate change. Because if I don't, it's like with parents. Healthy parents naturally care for their children and they don't need to read a lot of books about it. People that are connected to their bodies, they know by themselves what they need to eat because their body tells it. And so when we healthy parents care for their children, and I think in our healthy state we care for the world. Why? Because it lives in us. It's something that has been developed in order to be part of my experience. This sits in me, the planet, because I am in the planet. I am animated planet. So it's not that the humans destroy the planet. There is no separation between humans and the planet. This is one. And so that's why I believe that when we want to take care of climate change, and we see that there's a lot of knowledge around already since decades, but somehow we are not responding appropriately to the change that is needed. And I think that's because there's a lot of pain frozen that we don't feel. And like in the times of Egypt, there is the story of the plagues before the Jewish people left Egypt. And what the plagues say is that change starts over there. Change starts over there. Wisdom is that I hear change when it whispers. And then I align my life accordingly, so when the change is here, I am already moving. Wisdom is that I am quiet enough and not so consumed by my life that one part of me is awake enough to hear the whisper. We call it the whisper. That's when change starts to come. But most of the time, life needs to show us how it comes closer, like the toxins and all the stuff that we put out. Slowly, microplastic and toxins and all this stuff slowly comes back. Like in the time in Egypt, it comes closer and closer. We don't listen, until it affects our body. And then we learn through crisis, and we are used that when a crisis is here, that motivates us to change. But why? We could have changed before. Already for a long time we know what we need to change in order to deal with the crisis. And so, what I'm suggesting, because we are, what's the time? 3 minutes. So, what I'm suggesting is that I believe we have already a lot of tools. We have already a lot of relational tools that how we understand trauma within individuals. We know what is helpful. And I believe when we use some of the knowledge and we create dedicated fields, dedicated processes to look at the collective traumatization together and make it an issue. And that that we learn how to locate the traumatization that we have been born into, that is not biographically located often. Maybe my biographical experience is an effect of it, but there's something in me that I didn't experience, and it still affects my life. We had a professor for epigenetics in our last conference, Celebrate Life Festival, and she talks about how she can prove sperm cells transmit epigenetic changes, like trauma, to the next generations. So the next generations of mice have the same symptoms without the biographical trauma, until you make therapy with them. If not, then it goes on. That's interesting. And even if we don't look like a mouse, but maybe there's something similar in our life. And that's why I believe we are, through technology and our current expertise already that many people around the world have, I think we can approach this invisible jungle. And it starts with me, that I know when I hear something about the world that is hard for me, at least that I notice that it's hard for me, and that I start to explore my process, what it means. When we say something is difficult, we put the word difficult onto a process. And I think for us it's very healthy to find out what's the process that I call difficult. And that's a practice. And then you can also look in your own, we finish soon, in your own practice, how did your spiritual practice so far support you in dealing with what we talked about today? And how did it maybe not? It's both as important. How did it support you? So what kind of resources and strength and qualities did it give you? But maybe there are certain qualities that it didn't. So maybe we need to supplement certain more collective practices. We call this, I gave a class with William Ury, a kind of a world negotiator, and he talks about the third side. We are the third side to the Middle Eastern conflict. The Middle Eastern conflict lives in us. Everybody who has an opinion about it is part of the polarization. Everybody who has an opinion about the current political situation here is part of the whole thing. Remember the wave and the particle? Something is out there. It lives in all of us. And I need to know how I participate in the split. Part of the world is good, part of the world is bad. And I know we don't do this anymore in spiritual groups, but maybe we still do it in another way. We don't say but we say and. This is and. That didn't change the real thing. So changing our vocabulary is maybe not the only way to deal with it. So I think we're given the time, that's short time for a huge project, but that's an invitation for everybody who is interested to explore this deeper and see how my third-sider or my global social witnessing capacity is part of my spiritual practice, and that I learn to see that process in a higher resolution. Well, thank you. There's so much more to say, but